The fitness industry revolves around the enhanced lifters, which is not very surprising because whenever you want to learn a skill, you obviously want to learn from the people who are really good at the skill. If you want to become faster at solving the Rubik's Cube, you are going to want to listen to the person who solves it in like 3 seconds rather than the people who solve it in 15 or 20. Likewise, if you want to become better at playing the guitar, you're going to listen to the guitar player who is playing in a band that has millions of listeners on Spotify and not the one who has like 10,000 listeners. And when it comes to lifting, enhanced lifters are simply better than natural lifters in every single area. They smoke natural lifters out of the water. And with that said, it's not very surprising that they dominate the entire fitness industry. And since they dominate it, that also means that the majority of the advice comes from them. And even a lot of the advice that comes from natural lifters actually doesn't come from them. It is just advice that enhanced people said before and the natural lifters regurgitated. Like, how many times have you heard winter bulk, mesocycles, or training blocks? How many times have you heard, oh, just focus on training for 6 months and nothing else, do nothing else, don't go outside, track every single calorie, focus on the training, train 6 times a week, blah blah blah. How many times have you heard, oh, this is a 12-week training program? These are the things that at this point have completely gone into the mainstream of the fitness industry, and even a lot of the natural lifters that give advice like this. Oh, do this 12 or 16-week program. Oh, focus really hard for 6 months. Oh, do a winter bulk and then cut. None of this advice works for naturals. All of this shit has come from enhanced lifters because it works for them, but there is one thing that all of these things have in common, which is that they completely ignore one thing, which is that the most important asset of the natural lifter is time. Time in the game is the number one thing that matters when it comes to natural lifting. Somebody can literally come and start training perfectly from day one and train for 1 year, and it still is not going to matter. If he starts from the same point as I started from, he can train perfectly for 1 year. It doesn't matter. I have already trained for 5 years, so I'm gonna be better anyways, even though of those 5 years, most of them were just garbage training. Because building muscle takes time. Let's take an example. There's somebody who's training perfectly for 1 year, or maybe let's even say 2 years. Completely perfectly for 2 years. No alcohol, tracking every single calorie, perfect workout, perfect everything, perfect sleep, perfect recovery, no stress, nothing. There's another lifter who's been lifting for 10 years. He's going to smoke the other guy out of the water. There's no question about it. Even if the one guy who has been training for 10 years barely makes any gains every single year, but he consistently makes a little bit of gains, he's going to smoke the other guy out of the water because he has been already training for 10 years. Now, all of this is because you can only build a very limited amount of muscle in a certain period of time. Every single month you can only build so much, you cannot build more. It doesn't really matter how much you force it. A lot of people are like, hey, if you eat much more, you will gain more. You will gain much more fat, you will barely gain more muscle. The amount of muscle that you can gain in a month or even in a year is very, very limited. And even if you completely maximize everything, it's going to take time to see a change. That's exactly why your bulk should be as long as possible, because the more time you spend productively lifting, the more jacked you will get. And productively lifting means making progress, because obviously you can train for 10 years, but if you're not making any progress, you're not going to be bigger than the guy who's only been training for 1 year, but he's actually making progress. But if you're making progress every single year for 10 years, you're going to be bigger than the other guy. No matter what, the other guy can only build so much muscle in 1 year. This is why short bulks suck, because you need time and you need momentum to get those gains going. And this is why cutting should be minimized. This is why perma cutters, people like I was before, never get big, because cutting is not productive. When it comes to lifting, bulking is the most productive, recomping maybe can be productive as well, and then cutting is not productive at all because you're not really building muscle most of the time, except for obviously some people, like if you just only started lifting and you're really fat, or you've had a long hiatus, you haven't trained for 2 years and you're gotten fat as fuck, and now you're trying to diet down and you can actually make gains while cutting weight. That's an exception, but most people don't fall under that umbrella. Which means that cutting is not productive, bulking is productive. You should spend the most amount of time that you can bulking and the least amount of time that you can cutting. The ratio should be skewed mostly towards bulking, and you should only cut as much as you need to, not any more than that. You shouldn't always cut just to reveal the cage and get shredded and all that shit. It's not going to work, and you have to take your bulks slow. You shouldn't isolate yourself, not go out. Have perfect diet, train 6 times a week for 6 months straight to make a lot of gains in a short amount of time, because this doesn't actually work. Are you going to make better gains than if you wouldn't have taken that as seriously? Yes, obviously, but at the end of the day, what really matters is not whether you focus on those 6 months, it's whether when you break down your entire life, how much time have you spent making gains, alright? I don't isolate myself from people. I go out, I don't even track my calories, I go to the gym 4 times a week, and guess what? If you do everything perfectly for 6 months versus me, I'm doing this while bulking for 12 months, I'm going to make more gains. Now, it's important to talk about why this kind of advice comes from steroid users mostly and why it works for them. The reason why it works for the PED users is because they usually cycle. What most PED users do is they do a bunch of drugs for a limited amount of time where they make gains, and then they cycle off. And what they do is either they blast and cruise, which basically means that you take a lot of shit where you make a lot of muscle, and then after that you don't completely get off, you just take an amount of stuff that lets you maintain what you have gained, and then other people, they just completely cycle off and go back to natural. They try to restore the natural testosterone production, and then after that eventually they will do another cycle. And when you're not on a cycle, when you're a PED user, you're not going to make gains. That's just simply how it works. However, you as a natural lifter can always make gains because it doesn't depend on a certain compound. But since they can't, they only have a limited amount of time to make gains. Every single cycle only lasts for, I don't fucking know, I'm not a steroid user, I'm not that educated and all of that shit. But it doesn't last forever. It lasts for a couple of weeks, maybe 12 weeks or something, I don't fucking know. And then after that, no gains. So that means that on those 12 or 16 weeks, whatever, however long your cycle is going to be, you will have to try to make the most out of it, because after that you're not going to make gains for a while again. So since the cycle is limited in time, they have to make the most out of the cycle possible. But that is not the case for you. The problem, however, is that most of the steroid users have already forgotten what it was like to be a natural, and even if they are trying to give good, genuine advice and they are not full of shit, a lot of them doesn't really remember what it was like to be a natural, and they have no fucking clue what works for naturals because they only say what works for them right now, which is not the same as what works for naturals, because enhanced and natural lifters play by completely different rules. So what now? What does that mean for you? Well, I will give you the unsexy answer. Lift and be content with any gains that you can make. And then when you stop making gains with what you're doing right now, you change, because obviously what you're doing doesn't work anymore, so you have to change. But until then, just be content with whatever you can get. Don't try to always optimize and rush and be like, oh, maybe I could get an extra 0.1 inches on my arms per year. Doesn't fucking matter. Don't try to optimize when you're already making gains because, oh, maybe I can make better gains. Yeah, maybe. This is like you making 80k a year and me going up to you and saying, hey, here is this button. If you press this button, you might get an extra 10k a year. You might also only get an extra 1k a year. You might also not get any extra, and you might also get less. And you might also get 0 from now on. You're going to have to do the same work, but maybe from now on you're not going to get any money for it. Maybe. Would you press the button? Oh yeah, and by the way, you're not going to instantly know whether you got more or less money. No. You will only start to know that after a couple of months, but you won't instantly know that. And you can feel free to press the button as many times as you want. Oh, and by the way, yeah, pressing the button once costs 15k. Would you press the button? No, obviously you fucking wouldn't. It's not worth it. But why are you pressing that button when it comes to training? Whenever you modify your training just because, oh, maybe I can make better gains, that is essentially what you're doing. Because when you do that, if you have something that is already working for you and you're like, maybe I can squeeze out a little bit more growth, something you do is, first of all, you might get more growth with the new thing that you're going to do. You might get less. You might get nothing. you might get the same amount of growth. Another thing, for a couple of months you're not going to know it because it takes several months of doing the same thing to even know whether it works or not. And then you have to add to that whenever you change something, in the first couple of weeks, you're not really going to make any gains or just a very few gains, because in the first few weeks after changing something, you're going to make a lot of strength gains, which are mostly going to be neurological adaptations, because let's say you do a new movement or a new rep range and you have to get used to that. And first, you're not very used to it. And then as you do it more and more every single week, progressively, you're going to get more used to it. And that means that the force output you have essentially is not as high in the first weeks as it's going to be afterwards, which means that even when you go to failure, it's not actually like going to failure after like 6 weeks. So changing something just once, even if you're going to make the same amount of gains afterwards, it costs you a little bit. And the problem is what a lot of lifters are doing is constantly pressing this fucking button. But why would you even press the button in the first place if you're already making gains? You were already making a good enough salary. It was pretty good. It was nothing super crazy, but it wasn't bad. Or at least that was my intention with saying 80k a year, but to be honest, I have no fucking idea how much that is. I just tried to Google it. But you were too greedy and you had to press that button, and now maybe you're only making 60k. And the best thing is, you're not even going to know until a couple of months after now. And this is something that beginners do not understand, because they make a lot faster gains than people who aren't beginners anymore. That's why people say things to me like, you might be able to make better gains. Yeah, I might be able to, I might. But I don't give a flying fuck. Why would I? If I keep making gains at the same rate as now, in a couple of years I'm going to be a complete fucking monster. You have to check yourself before you do anything stupid. Like, I was thinking about changing my split, because right now I have an upper lower, and I noticed that after I do my benching and I do my overhead press, my triceps are a little bit more fatigued, and I was like, maybe if I would put my tricep work on my lower body days, I could make better progress because I could put in higher quality work. But then I was thinking like, wait a second. In the past 1 year, my arms grew 1.2 inches. Why the fuck would I change anything? Is this not enough for me? If I keep growing at the same exact pace, in 3 years, no, in less than 3 years, I will achieve 18-inch arms, which is obviously probably not going to be the case, because eventually progress will slow down. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying, like, why would I change anything? Everything is good, like I'm making phenomenal gains. Why the fuck would I change anything? Even if it might give me a little boost, why? I don't even need it. What I'm doing is already working, so why change anything? Why risk it? Because maybe the new thing is not going to work. Who knows? And the best thing is, again, as I said, you only find out after a couple of months if it has been working better or worse. So you're going to waste a lot of your time before actually knowing if what you're doing is better or worse. And if it's worse, again, you only realize after a few months. So you're going to waste your fucking time. In fact, I'm content with making any gains, because I know that I will make gains forever, which means that as long as I'm making any gains, I'm good. Even if I would only make 4 pounds every single year, in 10 years, I would be 40 pounds heavier. Is that not good enough for you? Like, come on. You have to look at the big picture. All of this progress will add up over several years. And if you're now like, yeah, but I don't want to wait 10 years to become big. Why? Where are you rushing? Let's say you started lifting at 15 like I did. By the time you're 25, you're already gonna be fucking huge. And you're only 25. And you've already trained for 10 years. What if you started training at 20? By the time you get to 30, you're gonna be the hottest, biggest fucking dad in the kindergarten. What we lifters really need is patience. This also means that you will want to spend most of your time productively, which means bulking, and you will have to take it slowly, because otherwise you're going to get too fat and you're going to have to cut early, and your bulking to cutting ratio is now messed up. Congratulations. So don't do that. Take it slowly. And that means that you want to bulk for a long time, and you know what that means? You need a sustainable approach. Your goal is not to have periods where you make a lot of gains. Your goal is to constantly make gains. If there is a guy who does a bulk every single year, which is 6 months, and then the other 6 months is cutting and maintaining and doing all that shit, versus there's another guy who very slowly gains weight all year long, the second guy in 10 years time is going to smoke the first guy. Because the first guy has only been making gains half of the time, whereas the second guy has been making gains all of the time. And it doesn't matter if the first guy was making quicker gains in that period of time, because the second guy made gains all the time, alright? This guy is not going to make twice as much gains as this guy. You really, like, you can only really make marginally better gains by dialing in everything completely, in contrast to doing everything just simply well enough. So go out with your friends sometimes, eat a slice of your grandma's cake. Don't do 2-hour-long training sessions 6 times a week unless you're so advanced and you need so much volume that less than that doesn't cut it anymore. Which most likely applies to nobody who is watching this video. If you cannot sustain what you're doing over many years, it's not going to work. Thanks for watching, and click here to watch my last video.